Hi, my name is David Garrett, and this is my colleague David Robinson. We're both attorneys at Nexsen Pruet. Typically, our practice usually focuses in on the mobility of both people and goods internationally. But today, we're going to be talking about the CARES Act, and particularly about the Paycheck Protection Program, which are basically SBA 7A loans for small businesses.
Yeah, the CARES Act, when it passed, one of the linchpins of the act was to prop up small businesses and encourage them to maintain their payrolls. And so they modified the 7A program, which is an existing program, to the tune of $350 billion to provide sometimes forgivable loans to small businesses to keep their employees on the payroll.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about this, overall, what are we talking about? Who's eligible for the loan? What can the loan be used for? How much of the loan can be forgiven? Can the loan be forgiven in all instances or just some instances? And what happens to those amounts that will not be forgiven? Those are going to be some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. But first of all, let's talk about what is it? Where did it come from at all? Well, I think obviously it came from the CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act that was signed into law on March 27th. And it provides up to $2 trillion of economic stimulus.
Yeah, there are a lot of changes happened as that CARES Act went through the Congress, and it's important that folks only look for information since the passage of that act, because there's a lot of information out there. Folks were trying to guess really as to what this act would look like. It changed fairly substantially into its final form, and so any guidance prior to March 27, just throw it away.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there has been a lot of content that was produced out there prior to the actual implementation even of the PPP. Most of the time, people were trying to project. They were trying to decide, well, this is what we think is going to be happening in the future, so let's put content out there. But it wasn't really until, last Friday, until April 3rd, and even beyond that, into April 6th, that we started seeing some real definitive guidance that we could begin to rely on regarding the PPP program.
Yeah, and it's not just small businesses, it's not just legal counsel and CPAs, it's really the government itself. It's the Small Business Administration, the Treasury Department. The analogy of we are building this plane while we're flying it is absolutely true in this case. And just note that what we're talking about today will be current today.
That's right.
But the SBA, yesterday they dropped another 16 frequently asked questions, and we're getting guidance really several times a day on this program and how it's going to roll out.
That's right. And because the SBA seems to be releasing information and guidance, and mostly in the form of these frequently asked questions, any subsequent information that is released, could drastically alter the information that we're talking about today. But I suppose let's talk about what is going on today.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, the Paycheck Protection Act is a loan that is provided by the Small Business Administration. The Treasury, Department of Treasury has some involvement as well. But the SBA is utilizing their existing 7A loan program. They are relaxing some of the requirements. They are waiving some of the requirements, and they're essentially providing a loan to small businesses that, if you use it for the right reasons and you spend it on the right things, up to 100% of it might get forgiven.
Now, the goal of the entire program is to keep a workforce from being disrupted. Does it apply perhaps to employers that have had to lay any workers off, though?
Yeah, it does, and I think we'll get to that in terms of there's some in terms of the forgiveness aspects of it. You are absolutely correct that it is tied to employment, and so for the 8-week period that folks have this loan, again, they have to spend it on the right things. They need to keep absolutely meticulous records that they have done so, and then that'll help them get that portion forgiven.
So what employers does this cover? Does it cover every employer across the United States, only large employers, only small employers? There's been a lot of confusion out there as to who is covered and who is defined as an employer under the PPP program.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And actually it changed the day before yesterday, as a matter of fact. A originally written, the CARES Act provided for any business with fewer than 500 employees to be eligible potentially for this 7A loan program. 2 days ago, they added back in, the SBA added back in some of their legacy eligibility requirements. And so you can either be a traditional 7A borrower, where the SBA has a test. It's based on either revenue in some industries or it's based on head count in some industries.
Right.
And so if you were eligible in that category, you are now eligible. They brought in nonprofit eligibility for this. Nonprofits, 501c3s, can be now eligible for the 7A program, traditionally not eligible. And then they've now added this blanket category of any small business, any business concern with fewer than 500 employees is now eligible for the program.
Now, what if you were the crafty person and decided that, well, gosh, it's April 2nd and I hear this loan program is dropping and I want to get signed up for one of these loans. I'm going to go out and form a small business. I'm now a sole proprietorship.
So, great question. And actually two answers to that, Dave, I think that would be useful to people. The first is you had to have been in business in February. And the banks are going to require differing standards between the banks, but bottom line, they're going to want to see that you were in business in February 15th of this year. And they're, of course, going to want to see your loan is based on what your payroll costs were last year. And so you're going to have that data. So bottom line, this is not an opportunity for somebody to start a business real quick and get free money from the government.
Exactly. So you've had to have had employees for most cases to be able to help document that you have a company, and your company needed to be in existence on or prior to February 15th. So,
but good point on the self-employed. So we've been talking about small businesses, but there's a category of eligibility under the CARES Act as well, where a sole proprietor or an independent contractor is also eligible.
And so these may be people without employees.
Correct. It could be if I say as an attorney had gotten a couple of W-2s are issued to employees, but 1099s are issued at the end of the year. 1099 MISC forms, they're IRS forms, and are given to independent contractors. So if I had independent contractor income last year, I'm now also eligible, even though I'm an employee here. I'm an independent contractor over here, and I would also be eligible as an independent contractor.
Exactly. Now, the definition of employee is really broad under the CARES Act and the PPP program. So it includes all full-time employees, of course, and we're talking the full-time equivalent, we're talking full-time and part-time, and basically every other status, with the exception of people who are your independent contractors. So as long as you can kind of count them as being an employee, even those employees that you may have that say are being paid by a third-party company, like a payroll and provider company, a PEO company, those are going to be counted as your employees too, even though under some state rules, employees that are counted by, that are employed, I guess, directly by a PEO company are reported as being an employee of the PEO company. Under this program, they do count as being your employees of your company.
So I think on that part-time employees especially, Dave, that's going to throw some people off. They're going to say, well, we had this intern for 3 weeks last year. Mm-hmm. Is that an employee? Is that part of our head count? And every indication is that yes, doesn't matter how short a duration, that part-time position is going to count.
So every employee within the previous 12 months can
Yep.
be counted toward that. So when you go to actually apply for one of these loans, what do we need to bring into our bank? First of all, does every bank have availability for this loan program? Can I just go to any bank to do it? How exactly do we do this, David?
So any bank that was already participating in the 7A program is automatically eligible to be providing these PPP loans.
Which is most banks.
Which is most banks. The farm credit system, the credit unions, most banks are. And there's actually also a way, and nobody's pulled it off yet, to my knowledge, but there's a way for other lending institutions to get involved in this as well on an expedited basis. And so Congress And now the SBA, they want to roll this out as fast as they can. So far, it's been sort of a tidal wave through a squirt gun. They want as many providers as possible.
And are banks just taking loans in off the street? You know, what I'm hearing from the people that have been talking to me about this is that banks are requiring you to have a pre-existing relationship with the bank in order to even come in and apply for the loan in the first place.
Yeah, we have, as a law firm, and then also certainly I'm representing at least two entities that are interested in being agents. So to refer, to market this program to small businesses that need it, and to refer that over to various lending institutions. As of right now, we're not aware, there's very, very few lending institutions that are taking on new customers for this. They've all, responsibly, it's been disappointing, but responsibly, they've basically said, we're going to take care of our own customers first.
Got it. Okay. And so when you go into the loan, it's my understanding that you don't need to put up any collateral for the loan. You don't have to make a personal guarantee even for the loan. However, if you do use the proceeds of the loan for non-approved reasons, if you decide to just take that loan and I suppose go buy a new yacht that you're going to park down in the Caribbean, the federal government will be after you.
Yeah, so absolutely. It is a program, again, as Dave said, no personal guarantee, no collateral. And the goal of it, ultimately, the government has said, is they want to forgive as much of this as possible. And so it is attractive in that regard. It's also attractive because the federal government is waiving the typical requirement that you look for money elsewhere. So
that's a really good point. Under many disaster relief programs, something that struck me this morning is that in order to qualify for other types of disaster relief federal grants, you have to first be denied an SBA loan. So here, though, we have an SBA loan program that's almost like it's been designed to not have any denials or have very, very few denials. What are your thoughts about that? Is this kind of, are we doing things a little bit backward than we typically do in other type of disaster relief programs?
Yeah, the goal is to push something that's as much of a cookie cutter product as possible. And so there are other, obviously, disasters, an economic injury disaster loan application. Folks use it after hurricanes and other natural disasters. They've declared the entire country to be a disaster for those disaster loans. But even in that scenario, they're still looking at a borrower's ability to repay. They're customizing a loan for a particular borrower. Here, they're just saying, calculate your payroll costs, and we should probably talk about that, but calculate your payroll costs, divide it by 12, so you get your average payroll cost, multiply it by 2.5, that's the loan.
So so that's exactly like how we define how much a borrower can borrow, the company can borrow. So loans can be up to 2.5% of the borrower's monthly payroll costs from the year prior to the loan. So basically, what you do is you take all your payroll costs, and here we're being inclusive as to the payroll costs. We're talking about all the different benefits that you pay your employees. We're talking also about the taxes that were paid on behalf of your employees from the company's portion. You add all that up, the gross income received by each of your employees on a monthly basis, then you multiply that by 12. And then you multiply that again by 2.
Divide it by 12.
Oh, you divide it by 12.
Yeah.
That's right. You divide it by 12, and then you multiply that number by 2.5.
Yeah. The essence of the program is the federal government is seeking to cover 2.5 months of your payroll costs. The one thing that we should note, Dave keeps talking about employees, and that is absolutely true. There was early guidance. The original version of the bill did include 1099 independent contractor payments. So companies at one point in time when the bill was drafted were able to add their W-2s, add their 1099s, all these other payroll costs. But in the final version of the bill, they stripped out the ability to include independent contractors, and that was a surprise to a lot of small businesses.
But a lot of independent contractors can qualify in of themselves as being a company.
That's why they dropped it, because they didn't want to see that double dipping.
That's right, and I think that they probably did that because of purely of the concern of the double dipping.
Yeah. One other caveat is that there are, and I don't, it's probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but certain seasonal employees are allowed to calculate or certain seasonal employees or certain employers that don't have a full set of payroll records for the prior 12 months. There are opportunities for them there's a formula for them to calculate their costs and to determine their maximum loan amount, even if they don't have 12 months of operating history.
A question that I received yesterday was, what is this? What's the deal with these individuals that we have at the company that are being paid over $100,000 a year? Do I have to completely exclude that particular individual in the calculation of payroll? Or do I count them as being $100,000 even if they made, like, say, $200,000? I'm just going to cap their payroll as being $100,000. How exactly does a company do that?
Yeah, we've actually, that was an early question and still a lingering question, of course, but we do have good guidance on that now. The $100,000 number that is included in the CARE Act is now being treated as a cap. So if you have an employee who makes over $100,000, you're allowed to claim up to $100,000 of that income or that payroll, in your calculations.
In that $100,000, so it's not $100,000 on a monthly basis. It's the annualized amount. So you would take the $100,000 and divide that by the 12 months in order to be able to determine what the monthly amount was.
Correct, and there's still a tiny bit, we think, of gray area in this calculation, but $100,000 is a salary cap. And so the other costs associated with that employee that you're allowed to include in payroll probably is not capped. What they're doing is capping the salary itself.
Right, so those could be like retirement benefits, vacation, parental, family, and medical, or sick leave. I guess even the payment of cash tips or the equivalent of cash tips can be included with that, and retirement benefits.
Yep. And we're here in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and there's a lot of foreign-owned businesses. Folks are certainly functioning fully in the global economy, and so they've got employees overseas as well. Early guidance and reinforced recently is that we are only talking about employees whose principal place of residence is here in the United States.
Right. So theoretically, and again, this is yet another question that I had just fielded just the other day, was that, well, I have an employee who's overseas. However, they've been seconded overseas. Do I count them or not? As in, my employee, my company is here in South Carolina or North Carolina. But they have sent them to go work in an affiliate company in France. They were working at the company for about 9 months in the previous year, but now they're physically located in France. And the intention of this particular employee was that they were going to be transferred back to the United States at the conclusion of their secondment, which is going to take for about 9 months. So they were asking, so do I count them or not as an employee? It comes down to what is considered to be the employee's principal place of residence. If they intend to come back to their regular residence here in the United States, then they're counted as being a U.S. employee, even though they may not be physically present in the United States today.
Yep. So, every small business or every independent contractor, sole proprietor, first and foremost, as we've talked about, they need to figure out, are they an eligible borrower? Then they need to calculate, as we've said, their maximum loan amount. But then layered on top of all of this, which is going to impact some of the larger businesses interested in this program, are the affiliation rules.
Good point.
And we had some, honestly, a little confusing guidance day before yesterday as to exactly how the affiliation rules that the SBA traditionally imposes on borrowers are going to apply to this. Suffice to say that what the SBA doesn't want is some wealthy individual with a whole bunch of different corporations who each have 499 employees to each get separate loans and to sort of game the system.
And let's back up just a little bit. When we start talking about affiliation rules, I think a lot of people's minds just go, oh my gosh, there's like so much different things, and now we have all these big legal words. What are we really talking about here? What is counted as, what is an affiliation under the SBA rules, and why is this important? Maybe we'll start there. Why is this important? I think you just brought it up.
Yeah.
Talking about somebody who owns a lot of different businesses. do we just treat them all as being one business, or are we gonna talk about each separate one where perhaps there could be double, triple, quadruple, even more, double dipping into the till?
Yeah, no,
about this?
that's a good point. That's exactly what they're doing with these affiliation rules, is they're saying who can be a standalone borrower, or when there's a group of companies, when do we consider the entire group as one borrower? And there's different tests. The most obvious is a control test. If a company has a subsidiary that they control, affiliation rules apply. You add the employees of both. If there's one wealthy individual who owns 3 different companies outright, all the employees of each of those 3 entities is aggregated. And so if you've got 200 in each, now you have an ineligible borrower. And so that's why it's important for companies that have what we call sister companies. Kind of a colloquial way of saying affiliates, a sister company or a subsidiary.
And you know, the affiliation rules can be both quite complex, but also they can have some really almost unexpected consequences. For example, if we have a husband and wife who each own their separate company, and they each own, you know, companies that they're running them entirely separate and independent. And maybe they even have different locations for their businesses, but they're in the same industry. Simply because of that familial relationship between the owners of 2 separate and independent companies, that can trigger the analysis under the affiliation rules. And whether or not we decide, you know, we treat these, you know, the husbands and wives separate companies as being one company or not, even though in fact that they're not one company. And this could be really important, like say, you know, if the husband's company is employing 200 people and the wife's company is employing 400 people, now they've got 600 people and they could be potentially ineligible under the law. So the affiliation rules, you know, can be something quite, you need to take a look at and seek independent legal advice about that if you think that they may affect you.
Yeah, because the application is, you know, you're certifying to the best of your knowledge using available information that you are accurately stating your head count. And if you have a holding company, if there are sister companies, if there are like businesses, you absolutely need counsel or you're not going to fill out the form correctly. And I think that's going to, the affiliation rules are going to trip a lot of people up eventually.
I think so too. And that's going to be, I think, a big subject to perhaps look back, you know, 8 months from now, or 9 months from now, or a year from now, as to whether or not that the certifications that were being made were being accurately made. Because, you know, one of the biggest parts and one of the most awesome things about the PPP program is this whole concept of forgiveness.
Yep.
Right now, forgiveness is like, you know, everybody's talking about, hey, these are forgivable loans as long as the loan proceeds are used in certain ways and we keep our employees. But do we really think that forgiveness is going to be quite as broadly construed a year from now or 2 years from now when these loans are maturing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's something that we need to be thinking about on the front end as you're applying for the loans, and particularly as you're using the loan proceeds, as to whether or not forgiveness could apply for you in the future.
Yeah, and good segue too, in terms of there are permitted uses for the loan proceeds. And then there are 4 of those permitted uses that give you credit to forgiveness of the loan.
Right.
Again, the big one, payroll costs, interest on a mortgage obligation. I think the important note there is don't prepay your don't pay off your principal.
Right, because it doesn't apply to the principal portion of your payment. It applies to the interest portion of your payment. So I suppose, like, if you're like early on in the acquisition of real estate for your business, then that's going to benefit you a lot more than if you're really close to getting your property paid off.
Yep.
Because your interest payments under most loans are going to be front loaded on the front end of the program, and so that's going to be the interest of that, not the entire mortgage payment if you're making actual mortgage payments on real property owned by business.
You know, same thing for rental payments. I guess the third category is rental payments. Just like a mortgage, it has to be something that you have committed to do prior to February 15th, right? This has to be, you can't go out right now and rent something.
So it's not a good idea to go out and rent like a whole ton of storage areas and put all my things into storage, and I'm going to use my PPP program funds to pay on the storage areas. I guess unless you already had the storage areas in place prior to February 15th.
Yeah. Agreed.
But for regular lease and payments or rental payments that you're paying pretty much on any property, is there anything else that rent and or in mortgage, or I guess, yeah, rent and lease is what
Yeah.
it's really covering, right?
Yeah. So payroll, rent, mortgage payments, and then the last category, we've had some client questions about what exactly is a utility.
Yeah, utilities.
Folks are thinking about trying to get creative with that, and I think we would discourage folks from doing so. They talk about a utility service.
Yes, and here, at least today, until we have some more guidance about this, David, I'm going to be interpreting this as being, these are what we all consider to be traditional utilities. These are going to be electricity, gas, water,
Yep.
maybe transportation, telephone, and internet. I'm not going to be too creative yet until we have more guidance as to what constitutes a utility.
Yeah, I honestly, I think if you don't get a monthly bill, if it is not a service from a third party, I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be counted as utility. But let's see what they say.
Yep.
Let's see what they say later on.
Absolutely. So let's talk dates really quick, Dave, because I think there's some confusion as to the forgiveness period. A lot of folks were looking at a date in June. The end of June is when this program expires.
Mm-hmm. So that's the 8 weeks, right?
Well, the 8 weeks.
Wait, this gets confusing. When
Yeah,
it does, doesn't
no.
it?
The 8 weeks is going to run from the date you get your loan.
Okay.
It's going to be different for everybody. So that's the date. I mean, you should be, obviously, best practices keeping good documentation of your payroll records and your rent payments and whatnot, but you need to be paying especially good attention to keeping good records during that 8-week period. Mm-hmm. The reason being that eventually, and we don't really know how banks are going to do this. Obviously, no one has ever done this in the history of the country yet. Under the Paycheck Protection Program, banks are going to need to take a look at those records. And they've got 60 days from the date you submit those records to make a determination as to whether that loan amount is forgiven or not.
Exactly. And so, I suppose if as a borrower temporarily place yourself into the shoes of your bank now, when you go in and your records are disorganized and they're unscattered, and now you're claiming these perhaps outrageous amounts, right? Because we're all going to be trying to add up the highest numbers that we can. Will the bank believe you if your documents are not in order? Maybe not. So you could be shooting yourselves in the foot if you're not doing a good job of maintaining and making certain that your documents are both accurate and the amounts that you've totaled up from those documents are accurate.
Yeah, good point, especially on the payroll costs, because the early guidance, and we believe it may end up just being a line in the sand that the SBA draws, is that the percentage forgivable amount for everything other than payroll will be 25%. So again, you can get forgiven for your payroll, your rent, your mortgage. However, they're going to, in all likelihood, there's certainly a firm suggestion at this point in time that they think there's going to be such a high level of subscription that they're going to cap the non-payroll costs at 25%.
Okay.
So again, the goal is to get people back into the workforce.
And so the amount that's potentially forgivable here is an amount that's multiplied by the average number of the full-time equivalent employees per month during that entire 8-week period. That's divided, though, by either the average number of full-time employees per month from February 15th through June 30th, or at the election of the borrower, the average number of full-time employees per month from January 1st or to I suppose, February 29th.
Yeah. So if you've furloughed people, if you have laid off folks, if you hire them back and pay them as full-time employees during this 8-week period, you get credit for that. Mm-hmm. There's a way to bring folks back into your payroll. Certainly those folks that contributed to that average monthly wage that gives you that larger loan amount. hire those people back, put them back on the payroll. You've got 8 weeks of basically federal funding to bring them back onto your payroll and continue to pay them.
So how is this really going to work out at the end when you're seeking for the forgiveness portions of the payment? Is there going to be an application? That's good. That's my understanding, that there's going to be an application that actually be filled out. I haven't seen any examples of what the forgiveness application is going to be. And I'm also beginning to think that perhaps that the forgiveness application may be on a bank-by-bank basis. So banks may be able to supply their own forms. We've already seen this in the application for the SBA loan program itself. For example, while the federal government has a particular SBA loan for the PPP program, it's a very short loan application. Banks are able to use their own application, so it can be done online, and it can be done perhaps through web applications and such. So when it comes to actually doing the forgiveness application, because there's been virtually zero guidance about this yet, we don't know what it's going to look like. And we also don't know what type of documentation is going to be required to substantiate that. So, there could be a lot of, I think, future interpretation as to how we actually get the forgiveness, but we think it's going to be certainly done by an application. And then after the application has been provided, I think the lenders will be making the decision within 60 days after the receipt of the forgiveness application.
Yeah. So let's, I wouldn't call it panic, but there's certainly some worrying in the marketplace that they're going to run out of money, that the banks haven't opened their portals fast enough, that they're not processing these applications fast enough. But then again, the media at the same time is saying, okay, well, Wells Fargo just did 10 billion, Bank of America just did, however many billion. And folks, I think, are getting worried about this. The tea leaves certainly suggest that $350 billion is not going to be enough. But we saw on Capitol Hill yesterday, there seems to be strong agreement that they're going to pump another $250 billion into this program. It's been wildly popular. If you haven't, I think absolutely best practices, if you haven't contacted your lending institution, you do need, they're not going to run out of money today, we don't think. But you absolutely need to get in a queue, whatever that looks like for your particular bank.
Yeah, I do think that, if you've been contemplating this and you haven't done it yet, now's the time to contact your bank and start getting your application together for the PPP program. Even though all indications are that this program will be extended, we don't know for how long. We don't know how much it could be. So this is a good time to at least, get in line to start talking to your banks to take advantage of these federal loan programs.
Yeah, pull your documentation together, obviously, but if that's going to take you more than a day, most of these bank application processes right now, again, they're so overwhelmed by this that most of them, my bank, Wells Fargo, you will fill out it takes you 30 seconds to fill out an application, and the response is, we'll call you when we're ready to pick this up. So, a Wells Fargo customer, for instance, will then, have at least some period of time to then pull their documentation together. So we say, get in the queue, talk to your banker if you've got an existing loan relationship. Absolutely tap that first, because we're also seeing, again, unfortunately, a number of banks not so interested in taking on new business at this time. But we're hopeful that some banks are going to like this program enough that they're going to see a real opportunity here, especially if it keeps getting refunded by the government.
Exactly. Well, David, I wonder if you have any questions from our audience. Okay, we have no questions from our audience.
So I've got a typical question, which is, what happens to the portion that's not forgiven?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if there's going to be a portion of the funds that will not be forgiven, well, if those portions, I think what we're going to be contemplating is that a portion of the funds will be forgiven, and then another portion of the funds will not be forgiven. And what David's really talking about, well, what happens about that part that's not forgiven? Then the loan is going to be continuing on with some really favorable terms, with a maturity date of 2 years, at least presently, and also an interest rate of just 1%. again, just currently, that's what we're talking about right
Yeah,
now.
just 1%. And there'll be a forbearance period as well, where you're not responsible for any principal or interest payments as well. So,
And that's for a period of not less than 6 months.
yeah, and perhaps extending up to a full year.
Exactly. Now, interest will continue to accrue naturally, right? 'Cause we are talking banks. So
Right.
interest will be accruing. However, the actual payment on the principal, interest and fees, I think could be completely forbeared, or I guess taken back, for not less than 6 months, but up to a year.
Right. And do note that the CARES Act originally said an interest rate not to exceed 4%. At one point in time, we were looking at a 0.5% interest, which would have been an attractive deal for, I think, any borrower. It went up to 1%, still a highly
Still a pretty
attractive
good
deal. It could change though, and so just note that as of today, that interest rate is 1%. But again, it's capped at 4%. So in any event, this is fairly cheap money, even if you don't get the ultimate forgiveness of the entire loan.
Excellent. Well, I think that I've exhausted the points that I've been hearing from my clients. David, have you had any other interesting questions come up?
The devil's in the details a little bit, and we still have some clients that are working with their banks because they've got unique situations. The form itself, I brought a copy of the form. It shouldn't take you more than, once you've calculated all your data, the actual completion of this form, what do you think?
5 minutes.
5 minutes tops.
5 minutes.
It's not a difficult process, but because applicants are having to sign this under a penalty of perjury, they're having to self-certify all of this, right? The banks are really not double-checking any of this. People are self-certifying. And because of that, the questions we get are the companies in the margins that have affiliation questions, that have seasonal workers, and there's kind of a way to game that a little bit, right, to get your maximum loan amount. Folks, absolutely, because of the attestations that they're making in this, again, the first page, really easy to fill out. The second page where you're initialing all these certifications, there is a legal, there's a legal consequence, if you will, for answering those questions correctly or incorrectly. And so, if you have questions about this, of course, we're happy to help. Nexsen Pruet, and your CPA can be indispensable as well. This is a great program. You don't have to apply necessarily today, but you should get in the queue as quickly as possible. But that said, because of these certifications, do it right.
Exactly. Well, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact us at nexsenpruet.com.
Yeah, and thank you again to Blueforest Studios. Beautiful facility here for us to record. We absolutely appreciate their hospitality, and we invite you all to also check out, again, nexsenpruet.com. We have a COVID-19 page, and that page has got all kinds of information for small businesses, everything from home delivery of alcohol to complex labor and employment questions, a lot of tax benefits being rolled out, a lot of other SBA programs that are available to small businesses. Please feel free to use us as your resource. Again, nexsenpruet.com, and the landing page for all of these articles and client alerts is COVID-19.
That's right. Well, thank you, and stay safe.
Yep, stay well.